Hi everyone, it's Stephen Wade here, and I am joined by John Chevalier, the Vice President of Global Investor Relations from the Procter & Gamble company. So thank you so much for joining us, John. It's great to be able to have a chat to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Excellent. So we wanted to bring you in just to understand some of your perspectives on what's happened. And this year has proved to be challenging in ways that I imagine that nobody would have been able to predict. But I'm particularly interested to understand how specifically the consumer staples sector has been impacted and how you've had to respond.
Yeah, it's interesting because, for all the challenge that's out there in the world on a human level, in many of the product categories that we participate in and many of our peer companies participate in, we've seen only accelerated demand from consumers, which is something that it's fortunate on one hand, and then there are also categories that we participate in that have been very difficult at the same time. With people at home and just simply not using products the same way they had been in the past, like blades and razors. I'm shaving a little less frequently than I have in the past, but for yourself, I can see that maybe you're using a few more different grooming products than wet shaving. So, but these are the kinds of things that we've had to adapt to in our industry.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, this is purely from laziness, not from any sort of pandemic or anything like that. So that's great. So you've seen an increase in demand, but impacted in different sort of categories. I'm curious to know about your investors as well. So,
yeah.
In turn, which of those issues have become more important for P&G's investors, and how have you and your team sort of risen to meet this interest?
Yeah, well, and that's been the hardest part of it, is just the sheer volatility that's been caused by all of this, and largely just by how much time people are spending in their homes, and just the jobs to be done for the consumer and where those jobs are being done now, more meals at home, more things like that, and the investors needing to sort through all of that to figure out which of the dynamics that they're seeing play through results on a quarter-to-quarter basis might be enduring trends that they can invest behind, and which are really just short-term volatility that's going to go away relatively soon once we get, hopefully soon, to a point of a vaccine or very effective treatments that allow normal life to resume, whatever that's going to look like in the future. So trying to help our investors sort out those things without obviously being able to commit to anything, because frankly, who knows in many of these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So trying to balance the short term and the long term and split them up. And how have you got about, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that, we've been fortunate to the extent that for Procter & Gamble, we had great momentum that we were building ahead of the volatility and all the different dynamics that have occurred in the last 5 or 6 months. So that served us well as we've gone through this very volatile period. And that's the thing that, again, we have to, from an investor relations standpoint, keep reminding people, is that the numbers they're seeing today are a combination of both the underlying health of the business and this additional stuff on top. It's not binary. And that is, many people who will watch this know, as they deal with investors, they like to boil everything down to one simple reason that something's happening, and this is just really difficult to do right now. There are multiple factors driving any individual company's results.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of those different factors and how your business has had to change, or how consumer behavior has changed in light of this pandemic. Specifically, how are you mentioned reminding investors about these different aspects. How are you communicating the ways in which your business has had to change, or the impacts on consumer behavior?
Yeah, back in our April earnings release, we had kind of adopted an approach of talking about the business in terms of the long term and our confidence that the strategies we have in place are the right ones, that we're focused on the right things for the long-term health of the business and good value creation, for our share owners. The short term, which is very much responsive to the immediate demands that we're seeing affect us, which are actually a little bit more certain or knowable than the midterm, which is really the most difficult thing to talk about. So trying to break it into these pieces of why we have confidence long term, what we're doing to address short term needs and opportunities and challenges, but then also just reminding people that it's really difficult to predict, in that the 6 or even like 3 to 12 month time frame is probably the least predictable of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, you mentioned the short term there as well. So specifically with your IR program, what short-term changes have been forced upon you by the pandemic with regards to IR?
Honestly, we really haven't changed our IR program that much. Being a mega cap company, we are fortunate that, when we want an audience with our larger owners, we're typically able to get it. We've been very responsive to their requests of us. We haven't used a lot of third-party corporate access resources. We have done a few investor conferences, but been very selective in doing that. I feel for the folks on the sell side right now, because it's, a lot of the, kind of tent post kind of big events that they rely on for their corporate access connections between companies and investors aren't happening, or they're happening virtually, which kind of lends to a different dynamic of, I think, investor demand. So we're fielding more inbound requests directly to us versus through third parties. And we're obviously very responsive to those, but it is a little bit more of ad hoc connection versus, kind of big organized connections through conferences that we might have done in the past.
Yeah, so that's really interesting in terms of an increase in fielding more inbound sort of requests, and the virtual transition that I can imagine a lot of the viewers will be going through as well. And that sort of leads me on to my next question, which is, which of these changes do you think will continue into the long term? So are you looking to travel as much next year, for example? How is that sort of?
I'm very certain for the next year, at least, we'll be traveling much less than we typically had, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And the comfort level of our share owners to do video calls has gone up tremendously. They're much, I think, more amenable to doing that than they might have been in the past. And frankly, a lot of our large investors, if we traveled to their office, say in San Francisco, they would still be using a video conference. We'd go into their video conference room to talk to 3 or 4 people face to face, and they'd have 10 more online from all over the country, because that's just how they manage their funds. So we were already doing some of this. Some firms were a little further ahead than others in utilizing technology. But I think everyone's comfort level now has just gone up. I think the idea of video calls is much better now because the technology is so much more seamless than it was. You don't have those long lags and things like that we used to have 10 years ago, right? I mean, we're doing a live interview right now, and we could be in the same room with each other practically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still those issues about muting and unmuting, but we'll get over
Depends how many people are on the line and whose dog is making noise in the background.
Absolutely, but yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's becoming more of the norm, which is fantastic. And just in general, so digital, in person, or just in general across your IR program. What do you think are the hallmarks of great investor relations, and what will you be taking into 2021, whether it's across the sector or across the market?
Yeah, well, these are not revelations by any stretch, but responsiveness is always going to be important. I think especially now, because people feel like when they do reach out, somehow maybe they're not going to get your attention like they would have before. I don't know why necessarily, but the same email that hits my inbox gets just as much attention today as it did before. And then also I think education, the ability to educate not only on your company's dynamics, but what's going on in your industry. I think that helps provide good context for investors to again, help them sort through the short, medium, and long-term dynamics that they have to invest through. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. We've chosen to continue to provide guidance all the way through. We know a lot of our peer companies have decided, at least for a period of time, they've not done that. Some have resumed, some have continued not to provide guidance, which I think is a fine choice if they feel like they really can't give that kind of perspective. But we've always been of the mind that we owe it to our owners to give them our best view of where we're headed, even if it is a much wider range of possible outcomes. That there's the possibilities are much wider. Drawing the probability curve above the range of possibilities is the challenge. And so we're doing less talking about the probabilities and more about the range of possibilities.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a question that's always on a lot of IR professionals' minds at the moment is when do they reinstate that guidance and when do they provide it? So that's fantastic. And my final question, thanks so much for your time as well, John, is just to understand, what is it that you're most proud of? What do you think it is that sets you and your IR team apart from your peers and other IR professionals? What are you sort of most proud of?
Well, I'm proud of the team we have, and I mean I'm blessed with outstanding people that I work with in my IR team, and our boss who's COO and CFO of the company, and our CEO. They get it. They really do understand and appreciate and respect the needs of our share owners or potential share owners. And I feel like we've got great resources we can use to address any of the questions we get. From the external interactions, I guess I'm proud of the fact that I feel like we can educate our owners on the company, the strategy, help them really deeply understand and sort through this really different kind of time they're going through. And I don't envy them their jobs of having to stock pick either for the short or long term in this kind of environment. But I feel like we are able to help them sort through that pretty well. If they choose to invest in us, great. If they choose that this isn't the right time, well, at least I hope that we've planted enough seeds that they'll respect the results when we do deliver them and get behind us then.
No, that's fantastic. And yeah, there's some really good points that you've brought up today in terms of sorting through that short, medium, and long-term possibilities, the need for IR to be responsive, to educate, and touching on the guidance as well. So that's really, really helpful. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate you coming on and having a chat to us.
Well, you're welcome, Steve, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thanks very much, John. And look forward to the next time we catch up.
Likewise. Cheers.
Thanks.